Meanwhile, sat at his kitchen table watching his phone light up with calls from reporters who had somehow learned that his case had federal interest, a phrase that made local officials sweat. And when Marcus finally did speak publicly, it was not with rage but precision, describing the arrest without embellishment, repeating officer commands verbatim, inviting the public to wait for the footage rather than trust his word. A move so unexpected it disrupted the usual narrative arc, and when the body cam was released under federal pressure, the video showed exactly what Marcus said it would. Hands up, confusion, force. The word resisting used as prophecy rather than description, and the reaction was immediate and combustible. Protests forming not with chaos, but with clipboards and cameras, civil rights attorneys descending, city council members scrambling to distance themselves from a department they had funded without question, and the mayor, who had once posed proudly with Kruger during Police Week, now issuing a statement about deep concern and systemic review. The twist came when an internal email surfaced showing that Kruger had been flagged months earlier for excessive force, but retained due to staffing shortages, a phrase that now read like an admission of willful neglect. And another twist followed when it emerged that Henson had trained newer officers in command presence, exporting his habits into the next generation, a quiet contagion. As the investigation widened, it became clear that Marcus's call had not just triggered scrutiny of two officers, but of an entire reporting culture that treated certain arrests as paperwork rather than people. And within weeks, the Department of Justice announced a consent decree investigation, careers unraveling not with handcuffs but with resignations, early retirements, and quietly updated LinkedIn profiles. Kruger's badge turned in without ceremony, Henson placed on unpaid leave and later terminated, the chief stepping down for personal reasons, while Marcus's charges were dismissed with prejudice, meaning they could never be filed again, a small phrase with enormous finality. Yet the most unexpected turn came when Marcus was invited, not summoned, invited to testify at a closed-door policy briefing in Washington, where he described not just what happened to him, but how easily it could have been avoided, how training emphasized compliance over clarity, how oversight was treated as punishment rather than prevention, and how a single lie, when unchallenged, metastasized into policy, and those in the room, hardened veterans of bureaucracy, listened not because he was angry, but because he was undeniable. Months later, Brookhaven Heights passed sweeping reforms under federal monitoring, body cam policies rewritten, complaint processes externalized, use of force language tightened, so that resisting required demonstrable action rather than officer perception. And while critics called it overreach, residents noticed something quieter but profound. Encounters de-escalated, reports read differently, and the old casual bravado faded. Marcus never sought fame, declined book deals at first, returned to consulting work focused on compliance and accountability, but when asked why he made the call, he simply said, "Because the system counted on me not knowing who to call." And in that sentence lived the real ending, not of two careers undone, but of a myth shattered, that ordinary people are powerless in the face of authority. Because on that August night, with groceries spilled on the street and guns pointed at his chest, Marcus Reed did not just survive an arrest. He exposed the machinery behind it, and the echo of that exposure traveled far beyond Brookhaven Heights, into training rooms, policy drafts, and quiet moments where officers hesitated, knowing now that the story they wrote first might not be the one that lasted. If you believe power answers only to silence, this story will change your mind. Before you hear another word, hit subscribe right now, because what you're about to witness is not just a story, it's a warning, a reckoning, and a reminder that one phone call can collapse an entire system built on fear. And if you miss what happens next, you'll miss how truth detonates. Now, here's the story. On a humid August evening in the fictional city of Brookhaven Heights, a quiet middle-class suburb that prided itself on manicured lawns and polite denial, Marcus Reed stood on the curb, with his hands already raised before the first police cruiser screeched to a stop, the red and blue lights washing his brown skin in alternating colors like a cruel, patriotic mockery, his grocery bag spilling oranges and a carton of milk across the pavement as Officer Daniel Kruger stepped out with his gun, drawn, shouting contradictory commands. "Hands up," followed instantly by, "Get on the ground," while his partner, Officer Blake Henson, circled behind with his weapon trained, neighbors peeking through blinds as if this were a scheduled performance. And within seconds the word resisting was barked into the night, even though Marcus had not moved except to breathe, his mind racing not with anger but calculation, remembering every lecture his father ever gave him about surviving police encounters, remembering the viral videos, the funerals, the names that trended and were forgotten. And yet here he was, 42 years old, a compliance officer for a federal contractor, a man with no record, No weapon, no threat, face pressed into hot asphalt while metal cuffs bit into his wrists and Kruger's knee dug into his back harder than necessary, harder than accidental, while Henson narrated into his body cam a fiction already forming. Subject refused verbal commands, showed signs of aggression, and Marcus realized in that moment that the truth of what happened mattered less than who controlled the first version of it, the official one, the one that would be typed before sunrise, taken to the station, charged with resisting arrest and disorderly conduct. Marcus spent the night in a holding cell that smelled of bleach and old despair, replaying the arrest over and over until the rage settled into something colder and more precise. Because Marcus Reed was not just anyone. He had spent the last decade buried inside compliance manuals, oversight loopholes, federal reporting structures, and one fact rose above all others like a lighthouse. Documentation, when aimed correctly, could cut through armor. Released on bail the next afternoon, bruised but unbroken, Marcus returned home to find his name already poisoned on local news. The headline reading, "Man arrested after confrontation with police." The body cam still unreleased, pending investigation, and friends advising him to stay quiet, to let a lawyer handle it. But Marcus knew silence was the oxygen this PC gas machine breathed. And instead of calling an attorney first, he called an old colleague from his Washington days, a woman named Evelyn Park, who now worked as a policy liaison embedded deep within the executive branch, someone who understood not just rules but consequences. And when she heard Marcus's calm, controlled recounting of events, punctuated by exact timestamps and officer badge numbers, there was a pause on the line followed by a question that changed everything. "Do you still have your clearance credentials?" Because Marcus had never bothered to deactivate them, and within hours he was assembling a packet so airtight it bordered on surgical, including dispatch audio discrepancies, past complaint records against Kruger and Henson buried in internal affairs archives, and a chilling pattern of resisting charges disproportionately applied in the same zip codes. And Evelyn, recognizing both the danger and the leverage, escalated the packet upward through channels most citizens never knew existed, until it landed on the desk of a White House legal counsel aide tasked not with politics but liability, a man whose job was to spot lawsuits that could metastasize into national crises. And Marcus's case glowed like a warning flare. 3 days later, before Marcus's arraignment, unmarked federal vehicles appeared at the Brookhaven Heights Police Department, where supervisors who had confidently signed off on the arrest reports now found themselves separated, questioned, and confronted with side-by-side comparisons of body cam footage and written statements that did not match, where Kruger's casual certainty began to fracture under the weight of his own recorded voice contradicting his sworn report, where Henson's history of justified force incidents suddenly looked less like coincidence and more like pattern. And as word leaked internally that this came from the White House, panic rippled outward, because the myth that federal oversight was toothless evaporated in real time. Marcus, meanwhile, sat at his kitchen table watching his phone light up with calls from reporters.